Fact sheet. Executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. Executive order from President Joe Biden of the US. The economy is booming under President Biden's leadership. The economy has gained more than 3 million jobs since the president took office, the most jobs created in the first 5 months of any presidency in modern history. Today, the president is building on this economic momentum by signing an executive order to promote competition in the American economy, which will lower prices for families, increase wages for workers, and promote innovation and even faster economic growth. A lot of lefties have an instinctual negative reaction when they hear competition, which they really shouldn't have. In an economy in which we can put up regulatory frameworks and barriers and floors and roofs for a whole bunch of different negative adverse behaviors that we don't want to promote, competition can be a really effective driving force at lowering prices for a lot of consumer goods and being able to bring forth innovation and technological advances at a faster rate, in being able to reduce the risks of monopolies when it comes to, like a loss of competition coming about the fact that there isn't enough an equal distribution of the opportunity for competition among all the existing firms within an economic sector, within a geographic location, and all the sorts. So we shouldn't have this negative opinion directly of competition. So it's just like one thing I want to point out, okay? Unregulated competition, doesn't really stay being competition. It often turns into an oligopoly or monopoly of some sort, assuming that we have a framework in place that allows competition to, be able to produce the positives. It's all good. We should be excited for it. For decades, corporate consolidation has been accelerating. In over 75% of US industries, a smaller number of large companies now control more of the businesses than they did 20 years ago. This is true across healthcare, financial services, agriculture, and more. So having oligopolies, monopolies can be negative and positive in, a bunch of different ways. And the negative is that when unregulated, it allows them to engage in a whole bunch of anti-competitive measures, such as, for example, just raising prices to a point because they are the only, producer of a given good within a given area. So they can practically raise the, price of a product to much higher levels than they would be able to, assuming that there was other competing firms in the area. And because there are no other competing firms, they can raise those prices, make things harder on consumers, and not face any, really punishments for it. Additionally, there may also be certain issues with like large companies because there isn't competition, because there isn't, anything that they need to fight against. There's like a slower rate of just general innovation within an economy. And because of that, then, we obviously don't garner as much economic productivity as we could be garnering. There are some benefits to having large market share controlled by one or two given entities. And that's that it's more likely for them to be able to obtain economies of scale, which basically means that the larger a firm is, or a group of firms are, the more effective their production becomes. So they may be capable of having prices even lower than the prices may have been, assuming that there was a bunch of different firms competing. And just generally, the production is a lot more efficient. It may be better for the environment. There are a bunch of positives that could come with that, assuming that there is regulation in place in order to prevent predatory practices from occurring by that firm specifically. And what is being talked about here, and the point that is being made here in this executive order, or in this preamble at least, is that a lot of the increase in market share for a lot of these industries has happened in an economy in which there weren't enough regulatory frameworks to disincentivize the prevalence of undesirable economic behaviors. The lack of competition drives the prices for consumers. That's what I talked about just before. As fewer large players have controlled more of the markets, markups, charges over costs have tripled. Families are paying higher prices for necessities, things like prescription drugs, hearing aids, and internet service. Barriers to competition are also driving down wages for workers. When there are only a few employers in town, workers have less opportunity to bargain for higher wages and to demand dignity and respect in the workplace. In fact, research shows that the industry consolidation is decreasing advertised wages by as much as 17%. Tens of millions of Americans, including those working in construction and retail, are required to sign non-compete agreements as a condition of getting a job, which makes it harder for them to switch to better paying conditions. So what it's explaining here basically is, let's say you live in a community in which there is only really one employer, right? Or there's only like a small handful. If they then say, I'm sorry, we're not paying you more than X dollars per hour, what are you going to do about it? There's not much you can do unless you travel really far and go and take another job. There's not much you can really do about it in that situation. You kind of just have to take that bad wage and work with it as much as possible. And that's what they're talking about here in this thing here. Non-compete agreements, I'm actually not quite sure what they are, so I'm going to look them up. And non-compete agreements are especially useful to ensure that employees who have had access to a company's confidential information and specialized training cannot just set up shop from across the street from their employer and use information on the job to compete with their employer. So it seems to be that a worker who enters a firm is not allowed to begin working or start their own firm in a similar profession or trade that would be in competition to their current employer. So basically, let's say that there is a massive automobile industry, and that's basically the only job there is, the only major job there is, a source of employment there is in your given location. Because you need to work there and you need to sign a non-compete agreement, that means that you're no longer allowed to, for instance, start your own automobile firm in the same area. You're also not allowed to start working for another automobile firm that may settle down in that area, which basically accentuates the monopoly, because that other firm then will struggle with access to employment and therefore will not be able to survive on a commercial basis. In total, higher prices and lower wages caused by lack of competition are now estimated to cost a median American household $5,000 per year, which, keep in mind, I think the median wage in the US is like $35,000 or something. 35,000 in 2019, it seems to be. That's a lot of, of 35,000, 5,000 for that just to be gone immediately is a substantial portion of your total income. This is the household income though, as I'm not sure if the other one was personal or household, but yeah, nevertheless, it's still very substantial. Inadequate competition holds back economic growth and innovation. The rate of new business formation has fallen by almost 50% since the 1970s, as large businesses make it harder for Americans with good ideas to break into markets. There are fewer opportunities for existing small and independent business to access markets and earn a fair return. Economists find that as competition declines, productivity growth slows, business and investment innovation decline, and income, wealth, and racial inequality widen. So yeah, basically, you want to create a sort of, or encourage in a lot of ways, the creation of more competition when it comes to the starting up of a firm and, small and independent firms. And the reasons why there haven't been a lot of them, it's fairly complicated. But when, like with the thing I mentioned previously, like the non-compete clauses, right? That's one factor that inhibits the formation of new businesses. There might also be further agreements, not necessarily between the firm and employers, but the firm and other firms that they might collaborate with. So maybe firms that ship you the inputs that you need in order for your production to function. Maybe you might have some agreement, some exclusionary agreement with them specifically that, within this area, they can only ship to you or whatever. You can also have just general issues with, hey, if there's a really big company in the area, and let's say you're looking for, let's say there is like a place in which there is like internet service, for instance, maybe there's not enough infrastructure, just like, cables and underground wiring and stuff like that, for there to be more than, the existing amount of internet firms within a given area. So because of that, it's also harder for new firms to settle in. And that's something that's also addressed in Biden's infrastructure package. There can also be just general informationary barriers. So if there is one firm that has been dominating a certain sector or a certain product of the economy for years and years and years and years, it's going to be very difficult for a new company to go in there and make a name for themselves, when as soon as anyone who lives in that town thinks of that product, they're immediately going to think of the already existing really big company. So these are just some of the factors that how monopolies and oligopolies inhibit the creation of new firms that could compete with them. When past presidents faced similar threats from growing corporate power, they took bold action. In the early 1900s, Teddy Roosevelt's administration broke up the trust controlling the economy, Standard Oil, JP Morgan's railroads, and others, giving the little guy a fighting chance. In the late 1930s, FDR's administration supercharged antitrust enforcement. So antitrust enforcement, I don't know why I can't say that, is basically enforcement agencies that break up monopolies and oligopolies, break up, like large conglomerates of firms in order to make things more competitive. That's what the antitrust laws do typically. Increasing more than eightfold the number of cases brought in just 2 years. Enforcement actions that save consumers billions in today's dollars and help unleash decades of sustained, inclusive economic growth. I'm going to take a look at chat in case they have any questions. Wait, you're criticizing monopolies and the wealth transfer during COVID while working for Twitch, who is owned by Amazon, the very company who has benefited the most from this pandemic. That's very true. Amazon is, in fact, a very big not media conglomerate, just general business conglomerate that has a lot of market share. 100%. However, criticizing an individual streamer for engaging in a given practice or benefiting a firm isn't really a good argument at all. The whole argument I'm making is that because of the existing monopolies, consumers don't have much of a choice as for what place they turn to, as for what different firms they work with. And Amazon and Twitch is one of those examples, right? When you look at streaming, there's YouTube and Twitch. Those are the major ones. Sure, there's Facebook, but come on, let's be honest here. And I stream to both of them. And that's because there is a lack of general choices when it comes to having a wide range of diverse competing different media companies when it comes to streaming, which is what I'm complaining about, right? The fact that the consumer, that myself, we don't have a lot of options in this regard. So we're sort of tunneled into one specific firm or a small handful of firms when it comes to our ability to engage and buy this given product or service. And the solution to that is a systemic solution, not an individual person refusing from, purchasing that good or service because of that very reason. Because it's a massive hit to an individual's well-being and their ability that will be completely ineffective and completely, unremarkable and have no effect on the broader scale when in what we actually want to address in this with this example. What am I supposed to do otherwise, Plot? Can you give me my example? Do I just completely refrain from streaming whatsoever? Do I just live in the middle of nowhere and just do nothing? If we operate under that system, then if we critique anything in society, if we have a disagreement with anything in society, we may not cooperate. So for example, you, the Plot, I'm sure you have issues with, the US federal government or the California government or whatever. I'm sure you have issues with the federal government, right? That means that you, the Plot, you are not allowed to engage with any forms of products or services that the government offers you. So number one, no international travel for you at all. No, utilization of federally funded roads, services, infrastructure, social security programs, housing programs, none of that. You aren't allowed to do any of that because you have generalized disagreements with the entity producing those things. You've made a system, you've made a worldview that is self-contradictory in the sense that you can never criticize it. Because if you do, you immediately lose any type of power that you can really use to put the weight behind your criticisms. Today, President Biden is taking decisive action to reduce the trend of corporate consolidation, increase competition, and deliver concrete benefits to American consumers, workers, farmers, and small businesses. Today's historic executive order established a whole of government effort to promote competition in the American economy. The order includes 72 initiatives by more than a dozen of federal agencies to promptly tackle some of the most pressing competition problems across our economy. Once implemented, these initiatives will result in concrete improvements to people's lives. Among other things, they will make it easier to change jobs and help raise wages by banning or limiting non-compete agreements and unnecessary cumbersome occupational licensing requirements that impede economic mobility. Lower prescription drug prices by supporting state and tribal programs that will import safe and cheaper drugs from Canada. Save Americans with hearing loss thousands of dollars by allowing hearing aids to be sold over the counter at drugstores. Save Americans money on their internet bills by banning excessive early termination fees, requiring clear disclosure of planned costs to facilitate comparison shopping, and ending landlord exclusivity agreements that stick tenants with only one single internet option. Make it easier for people to get refunds from airlines and to comparison shop for flights by requiring upfront disclosure on add-on fees. Make it easier and cheaper to repair items you own by limiting manufacturers from borrowing self-repairs or third-party repairs of their products. So this is right to repair stuff. Make it easier and cheaper to switch banks by requiring banks to allow customers to take their financial transaction data with them to a competitor. Empower family farmers and increase their incomes by strengthening the Department of Agriculture's tools to stop the abusive practices of some meat processors. Increase opportunities for small businesses by directing all federal agencies to promote greater competition through their procurement and spending decisions. This is all really good. A lot of the things they talk about has to do with countering one of the key aspects of monopolies and oligopolies, which is exclusive access to information or limited access to information. So for competition to work in the ideal manner, you basically require fully informed consumers at all times, which is not possible. And that's why like super hyper perfect competition is never possible. But what they're doing by, for example, requiring clear discourse plan costs to facilitate comparison shopping, comparison shop by, making prices more clear, like being able to take your transaction data to like other banks and stuff like this. Makes it easier to have a greater form of source of information from which to make more educated economic decisions. All of these typically, they strike me as pretty good. One of them I see that there might be a bit of an issue with, and that's the first one, while non-compete agreements in the sense that, hey, if it's only one firm operating within an area, that can be a bit problematic. So like we mentioned previously, the example of non-compete agreements, that can be very unnecessary, but in certain situations, it might be pretty necessary for maybe specifically for higher level positions to prevent the yoinking, highly economic term, the yoinking of certain business practices or modes of production from somebody who just starts working at a place. They just get a layout of how everything works and then leave to go to another firm or whatever. So maybe outright banning all non-compete agreements, probably not a good idea, but probably heavily restricting their implementation today is most likely going to be a good idea. But the rest of them seem really good. The order also encourages the leading antitrust agencies to focus enforcement efforts on problems in key markets and coordinates other agencies' ongoing response to corporate consolidation. The order calls on the leading antitrust agencies, so agencies that bust up large company conglomerates, the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, to enforce antitrust laws vigorously and recognize that the law allows them to challenge prior bad mergers that past administrations did not previously challenge. So what this basically means is that, mergers, and my understanding at least, is when like two large firms join up with each other and become one firm, so they hold like a larger piece of market share combined then because they're now a new one firm. These things typically have to go through like forms of antitrust legislation, right, to see if they pass and to make sure that they don't create adverse incentives within that market. And that's why they need to get like an approval, from like the antitrust agencies to say that this is okay. Now, what they're saying here is that they want to remind and make sure that these antitrust agencies recognize that they can revoke and they can challenge bad decisions that were made previously in terms of large conglomerates merging with each other, which basically ensures that, hey, from now on, we will take this more seriously, but we will also look back and see if there were any bad decisions taken previously that need to be addressed. Announces a policy that enforcement should focus in particular on labor markets, agricultural markets, healthcare markets, which includes prescription drugs, hospital consolidation and insurance, and the tech sector. So yeah, basically it focuses on a number of key industries with specific issues and that are often talked about in today's political climate. Establishes a White House Competition Council led by the Director of National Economic Council to monitor progress on finalizing the initiatives in the order and to coordinate the federal government's response to the rising power of large corporations in the economy. So just basically more information and more investigations on the topic. A more detailed summary of the key action in the order are provided below. But yeah, that's like the brief summary. Let me check if there's any questions from chat. I like how America has reduced its carbon emissions over the years, while countries like China and India have skyrocketed due to their industrialization. Number one, okay, let's talk about a few things here. Number one, that is true. The US does have lower carbon emissions than China, at least right now, and India, I'm not quite sure, but I can see India is growing a lot faster than what the US does. 100%. That's true. And I will openly criticize China and India as well for their growth of carbon emissions, okay? Does that mean that now because, North America or the United States isn't the worst offender, does that now mean that they are completely off the hook? No, absolutely not. So even if you take like a place that's, relatively climate neutral as Sweden, I think there have been statistics demonstrating that even if everybody on the earth lived like we did in Sweden, you would still need 2.2 planets basically to make up for our demand that we have right now. So even though the US might not be the worst offender anymore, doesn't mean that it is still not operating at a level above what we should be operating at in order to have a sustainable planet. That's point number one. Point number two is that the US, as the basically financial and economic capital of the world, it can do a tremendous amount of good when it comes to researching and making public and making available technologies and productions that can be adopted worldwide in order to help, address climate change in a more effective manner. And it can also have a very strong and powerful voice on the international stage, on the geopolitical stage, when it comes to getting industrial giants like China and India onto trade agreements that limit their ability to, release emissions, which is bad. So that's why we should still talk about the US. Labor markets. Competition in labor markets empowers workers to demand higher wages and greater dignity and respect in the workplace. One way companies stifle competition is with non-compete clauses. Roughly half of private sector business require at least some employees to enter non-compete agreements, affecting some 36 to 60 million workers. Overly burdensome occupational licensing requirements that impede workers' mobility and suppress wages also restrict competition. Today, almost 30% of jobs in the United States require a license, up from less than 5% in the 1950s. Fewer than 5% of occupations that require licensing in at least one state are treated consistently across all 50 states. That locks some people out of jobs and makes it harder for people to move between states, particularly burdening military spouses, of whom work in the field requires requiring license and are subject to military-directed moves every few years. So basically, make it easier for licensing to be translated across state borders to allow for greater mobility of labor. Workers may also be harmed by existing guidance provided by the Department of Justice and Federal Trade Commission to human resource personnel that allows third parties to make wage data available to employers and not to workers. In certain circumstances without triggering antitrust scrutiny. This may be used to collaborate to suppress wages and benefits. So what this is talking about is it's talking about the fact that certain employers are now able to access third-party data about the wages of workers, and the workers themselves are not able to access this information. Why is this an issue? Well, let's say that you have 5 big firms operating within a city, okay, and within a given sector. Now, let's say that all the employees there, see what the wages of the other firms are at. That means that they can all coordinate and decide that, hey, we will not raise, not directly verbally, they will not have a meeting and say, hey, let's not raise the wages past this point, but because they can see what the other firms are paying them, they have no need to pay higher than that. They can pay equal wages or maybe slightly marginal differences. But they all have a sort of collective incentive in a way to not raise the wages at a, higher than what the other firms in the area are paying. And therefore they can keep wages low and therefore not waste as much money on that cost of production. In this order, the president encourages the FTC to ban or limit non-compete agreements, encourages the FTC to ban unnecessary occupational licensing restrictions that impede economic mobility, encourages the FTC and DOJ to strengthen antitrust guidance to prevent employees from collaborating to suppress wages or reduce benefits by sharing wage and benefit information with one another. These actions complement the president's call for Congress to pass the Protecting the Right to Organize PRO Act to ensure that workers have a free and fair choice to join a union and to collectively bargain. Based. Unions are critical to empowering workers to bargain with their employers for better jobs and to creating an economy that works for everyone. Yep, this is already good. The only thing I'm worried about is I hope they don't just outright ban all non-compete agreements ever, because I'm sure there are some situations in which they could be reasonable. Healthcare. The proposed order tackles 4 areas where lack of competition in healthcare increases prices and reduces access to quality care. Prescription drugs. Americans pay more than 2.5 times as much for the same prescription drugs as peer countries, and sometimes much more. Price increases continue to far surpass inflation. As a result, nearly 1 in 4 Americans report difficulties paying for medication, and nearly 1 in 3 Americans report not taking their medications as prescribed. This is absolutely fucking terrifying. Like, let's just focus on this again, okay? 1 in 4 Americans have difficulties paying with medication. It's a struggle for them in order to ensure that they have access to the substances that they need to function in a healthy capacity. And 1 in 3 Americans, which is a greater portion of those people, do not take the medication in the forms that they're, prescribed. And while it's not directly the case that all 1/3 of these people don't do it because of economic limitations, it's likely that probably a substantial portion of them do, which means that there is a large portion of Americans today that aren't able to, take the substances that they need in the recommended amounts to stay healthy because of economic limitations, which is absolutely terrifying, and it's something that should definitely be addressed. These high prices are in part the result of a lack of competition among drug manufacturers. The largest pharmaceutical companies are able to wield their market power to reap average annual profits of 15 to 20%, as compared to average annual profits of 4 to 9% for the largest non-drug companies. One strategy that drug manufacturers have used to avoid competing is pay-for-delay agreements, in which brand name drug manufacturers pay generic manufacturers to stay out of the market. That has raised drug prices by $3.5 billion per year, and research shows that pay-for-delay and similar deals between generic and brand name manufacturers reduce innovation, reducing new trials and R&D expenditures. So basically, there are a series of manufacturers that will pay other competitors to stay out of the market in order for them to be able to retain economic monopoly on that given sector of the economy, on that given market, which is bad for all the reasons I laid out before. In the order, the president directs the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, to work with states and tribes to safely import prescription drugs from Canada pursuant to the Medicare Modernization Act of 2003. So basically, the economic theory behind this is that you're now opening up the market. You're making the market larger. You're allowing other people to enter, which in this case are the producers in Canada. And therefore, you disrupt some of the monopolies and oligopolies that may exist and basically lead to increased competition and just more potential output within the market. Directs the Health and Human Services Administration to increase support for generic and biosimilar drugs which provide low-cost alternatives to patients. So basically, as a counter to drug manufacturers paying people to stay out of the market. Direct HHS to issue a comprehensive plan within 45 days to combat high prescription drug prices and price gouging. So I suppose that we're going to get a more comprehensive plan of this relatively soon, so I can talk about that then specifically. Not much to say about it for the moment. Encouraging the FTC to ban pay-for-delay and similar agreements by rule. So basically banning the things I talked about before. So supporting the generic drug producers at the same time as banning practices that sort of encourage them to leave the market. Hearing aids. Hearing aids are so expensive that only 14% of the approximately 48 million Americans with hearing loss use them. Yeah, that's not great. On average, they cost more than $5,000 per pair, and these costs are often not covered by health insurance. A major driver of the expense is that consumers must get them from a doctor or a specialist, even though experts agree that medical evaluation is not necessary. Rather, this requirement serves only as red tape and a barrier to more companies selling hearing aids. The 4 largest hearing aid manufacturers now control 84% of the market. So yeah, this seems to be an example in which a specialist opinion is probably not warranted when it comes to this specific medical treatment, getting hearing aids. And because of that, we should cut that as a requirement to make it more accessible to consumers. In 2017, Congress passed a bipartisan proposal to allow hearing aids to be sold over the counter. However, the Trump administration Food and Drug Administration, that's weirdly worded, failed to issue the necessary rules that would actually allow hearing aids to be sold over the counter, leaving millions of Americans without low-cost alternatives. So yeah, Trump's administration was incompetent, basically, is what this says. In the order, the president directs HHS to consider issuing proposed rules within 120 days for allowing hearing aids to be sold over the counter. Hospital consolidation has left many areas, especially rural communities, without good options for convenient and affordable healthcare services. Thanks to unchecked mergers, the 10 largest healthcare systems now control a quarter of the market. Since 2010, 139 rural hospitals have shuttered, including a high of 19 last year in the middle of a healthcare crisis. Research shows that hospitals in consolidated markets charge far higher prices than hospitals in markets with several competitors. In the order, the president underscores that hospital mergers can be harmful to patients and encourages the Justice Department and FTC to review and revise their merger guidelines to ensure patients are not harmed by such mergers. Directs HHS to support existing hospital price transparency rules and to finish implementing bipartisan federal legislation to address surprise hospital billing. So just more discussion about ending bad mergings and more focus on antitrust laws to prevent there from being, like private monopolies of hospital healthcare providers. Health insurance consolidation in the health insurance industry has meant that many consumers have little choice, so then they can ramp up prices, like I mentioned previously. When it comes to selecting insurers, and even when there is some choice, comparison shopping is hard because plans offered on the exchange are complicated, with different services covered in different deductibles. In the order, the president directs HHS to standardize plan options in the national health insurance marketplace so people can comparison shop more easily. Basically, make sure the health insurance companies give more information and the situations in which there are comparisons to be made so that consumers can make a better educated choice. Transportation. In the transportation sector, multiple industries are now dominated by large corporations: air travel, rail, and shipping. Airlines. The 4 top commercial airlines control nearly 2/3 of the domestic market. Reduced competition contributes to increasing fees like baggage and cancellation fees. These fees are often raised in lockstep, demonstrating a lack of meaningful competitive pressure, and are often hidden from consumers at the point of purchase. So basically, it seems like these extra fees are all raised at more or less the same time, and that these extra costs are not really apparent from a consumer selecting that service at the point of purchase. The top 10 airlines collected $35.2 billion in ancillary fees in 2018, up from just $1.2 billion in 2007. So they have more than way more than doubled. I don't know what I'm talking about. Increased by $34 billion the amount that they receive from ancillary fees, which is, unless there's been some massive thing that I'm missing and this executive order is completely missing, seems to be mostly just an effect of them being able to drive up the extra cost of these fees, more so than some change that has occurred to the airline market over that period of time that has contributed to a need for the raise in those fees. Inadequate competition also reduces incentives to provide good service. For example, the Department of Transportation, the DOT, estimates that airlines were late in delivering at least 2.3 million checked bags in 2019. Cringe. Be more efficient, okay? Also here in Sweden. I'm talking to you, PostNord, okay? In the order, the president directs the DOT to consider issuing clear rules requiring the refund of fees when baggage is delayed or when service isn't actually provided, like when the plane's Wi-Fi or in-flight entertainment system is broken. Nice. Basically, in other words, make sure that the firms refund consumers in the case that they don't get what they buy. Yeah, okay, that's probably a good thing. Direct the DOT to consider issuing rules that require baggage change and cancellation fees to be clearly disclosed to the customer. So basically, make sure that it is more apparent at the point of purchase what the extra cost is going to be for the baggage change and cancellation fees to make sure the consumer can make a more informed decision. Rail. In 1980s, there were 33 Class 1 freight railroads compared to just 7 today. And 4 major rail companies now dominate their respective geographic regions. Freight railroads that own the track and privilege their own freight traffic, making it harder for passenger trains to have on-time service and can overcharge other companies' freight trains. In the order, the president encourages the Surface Transportation Board to require railroad track owners to provide rights of way to passenger rail and to strengthen their obligation to treat other freight companies fairly. So basically ensure that private owners of railroad track aren't so restrictive in what other operations can occur on them. Shipping. In maritime shipping, the global marketplace has rapidly consolidated. In 2000, the largest 10 shipping companies controlled 12% of the market. Today, it is more than 80%, leaving domestic manufacturers who need to export goods at these large foreign companies' mercy. This has let powerful container shippers charge exporters exorbitant fees for time their freight was sitting waiting to be loaded or unloaded. These fees, called detention and demurrage charges, can add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. In the order, the president encourages the Federal Maritime Commission to ensure vigorous enforcement against shippers charging American exporters exorbitant charges. So basically make American export markets more competitive. Make sure that American firms have an easier time exporting their products. Agriculture. Over the past few decades, key agricultural markets have become more concentrated and less competitive. The markets for seed, equipment, feed, and fertilizer are now dominated by just a few companies, meaning family farmers and ranchers now have to pay more for these inputs. For example, just 4 companies control most of the world's seeds, and corn seed prices have gone up as much as 30% annually. Consolidation also limits farmers and ranchers' options for selling their products. That means they gain less when they sell their produce and meats, even as prices rise at the grocery store. For example, 4 large meat packing companies dominate over 80% of the beef market, and over the last 5 years, farmers' share of the price of beef has dropped by more than a quarter, from 51% to 37.3%, while the price of beef has risen, indicating then that it's these firms that are taking the increase in the potential revenue, or in the actual revenue. Overall, farmers and ranchers' share of each dollar spent on food has been declining for decades. In short, family farmers and ranchers are getting less, consumers are paying more, and the big conglomerates, basically the middlemen, the big conglomerates in the middle, are taking the difference. Meanwhile, the law designed to combat these issues, the Packers and Stockyards Act, was systematically weakened by the Trump administration Department of Agriculture. American farmers and ranchers are also getting squeezed by foreign corporations importing meat from overseas with labels that mislead customers about its origin. Under current labeling rules, meat can be labeled product of USA if it's only processed here, including when meat is raised overseas and then merely processed into cuts of meat here. For example, most grass-fed labeled product of USA is actually imported. That means it's harder and impossible for consumers to know where their food comes from and to choose to support American farmers and ranchers. So basically, more information for the consumer so they can make a more informed decision. Corporate consolidation even affects farmers' ability to repair their own equipment or to use independent repair shops. Powerful equipment manufacturers such as tractors and manufacturers use proprietary repair tools, software, and diagnostics to prevent third parties from performing repairs. For example, when certain tractors detect a failure, they cease to operate until a dealer unlocks them. That forces farmers to pay dealer rates for repairs that they could have made themselves or that an independent repair shop could have done more cheaply. So basically, it's more right to repair stuff. Make it possible for other third parties to repair products so they don't have to go back to the manufacturer of the product specifically and pay their uncompetitive prices on those repairs. In the order, the president directs the USDA to consider issuing new rules under the Packers and Stockyards Act, making it easier for farmers to bring and win claims, stopping chicken processors from exploiting and underpaying chicken farmers, and adopting anti-retaliation protections for farmers who speak out about bad practices. Directs USDA to consider issuing new rules defining when meat can bear product of USA labels so that consumers have accurate, transparent labels that enable them to choose the products made here. Directs the USDA to develop a plan to increase opportunities for farmers to access markets and receive a fair return, including supporting alternative food distribution systems like farmers markets and developing standards and labels so that consumers can choose to buy products that treat farmers fairly. Encourages the FTC to limit powerful equipment manufacturers from restricting people's ability to use independent repair shops or do DIY repairs, such as when tractor companies block farmers from repairing their own tractors. Yeah, good stuff. Internet service. The order tackles 4 issues that limit competition, raise prices, and reduce choices for internet service. Lack of competition among broadband providers. More than 200 million US residents live in an area with only 1 or 2 reliable high-speed internet providers, leading to prices as much as 5 times higher in these markets than in markets with more options. A related problem is landlords and internet service providers entering exclusivity deals or collusive agreements that leave tenants with only one option. This impacts low-income and marginalized neighborhoods because landlord ISP agreements can effectively block out broadband infrastructure expansion by new providers. So basically what they're saying here is that housing providers that sign exclusivity agreements with certain ISPs basically make it impossible for consumers, for the tenants then, to have any meaningful options in regards to what ISP they want to have, more than if they were to completely move their house and then their housing provider as well, which limits the choice and therefore hampers competitiveness. In the order, the president encourages the FCC to prevent ISPs from making deals with landlords that limit tenants' choices, lack of price transparency. So that's number one. So limit these deals that limit the choices of tenants from allowing a wide range of ISPs to provide internet service to them, basically. Lack of price transparency. Even where consumers have options, comparison shopping is hard. According to the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, actual prices paid for broadband services can be 40% higher than advertised. During the Obama-Biden administration, the FCC began developing a broadband nutrition label, a simple label that provides basic information about the internet service offered so people can compare options. The Trump administration FCC abandoned those plans. In the order, the president encourages the FCC to receive the broadband nutrition label and require providers to report prices and subscription rates to the FCC. Basically, more information, more informed choices yet again. High termination fees. If a consumer does find a better internet service deal, they may be unable to actually switch because of high early termination fees. On average, nearly $200 charged by internet providers. So basically, let's say there is a new really good option that you are able to buy, so there aren't any restrictions in terms of your housing. A lot of people are still, locked out of being able to do that because of high costs to withdrawing from their current agreements. And the FCC, the president encourages the FCC to limit these excessive early termination fees. Companies discriminatorily slowing down internet access. Net neutrality memes. Big providers can use their power to discriminatorily block or slow down online services. The Obama-Biden administration's FCC adopted net neutrality rules that require these companies to treat all internet services equally, but this was undone in 2017. In the order, the president encourages the FCC to restore the net neutrality rules undone by the prior administration. Net neutrality. Again, remember how big of a thing this was? And now it's just one bullet point in this massive piece of competitiveness plan. That's very cool. That's very cool. And it's a good talking point as well, especially on internet discourse. Technology. The order tackles 3 areas in which dominant tech firms are undermining competition and reducing innovation. Big tech platform purchasing would be competitors. Over the past 10 years, the largest tech platforms have acquired hundreds of companies, including alleged killer acquisitions meant to shut down a potential competitive threat. Too often, federal agencies have not blocked, conditioned, or in some cases meaningfully examined these acquisitions. So what they're talking about here is that big media companies have been able to just buy out competitors or other similar firms without that being blocked by antitrust laws. And because of that, you've been able to form really big media monopolies. In the order, the president announces an administration policy of greater scrutiny of mergers, especially by dominant internet platforms, with particular attention to the acquisition of nascent competitors, serial mergers, and accumulation of data, competition by free products, and the effect on user privacy. Now, it's greater scrutiny. So it's like what they mentioned previously, how these antitrust administrations and parts of government are able to more carefully look at these purchases, these merges, and go over more and scrutinize them more heavily. Big tech platforms gathering too much information. Many of the large platforms' business models have depended on the accumulation of extraordinarily, this is misspelled, this is me saying it wrong, extraordinarily amounts of sensitive personal information and related data. Extraordinarily high amounts, I would assume it's meant to say. In the order, the president encourages the FTC to establish rules on surveillance and the accumulation of data. So I can't comment much on this until you see what these rules actually are. Big tech platforms unfairly competing with small businesses. The large platforms' power give them unfair opportunities to get a leg up on the small businesses that rely them to reach customers. For example, companies that run dominant online retail marketplaces can see how small businesses' products sell and then use the data to launch their own competing products. Because they run the platform, they can display their own copycat products more prominently than the small businesses' products. In the order, the president encourages the FTC to establish rules barring unfair methods of competition on internet marketplaces. So this is something that Amazon has been doing for a really long time. So let's say that Amazon sees that, a specific type of product is selling really well on their website because they're a retailer, right? What they can then do is they themselves can see, okay, wow, this product is selling really well. We're going to make our own Amazon version of this product. They do that, okay, well, assuming a free marketplace, that's not going to do much, right? Because the other one was there before, they're more well-known, they might be better, yada, yada, yada. Well, Amazon doesn't matter. They'll just put their product right at the top when people search for that given product. And that's what they're trying to address through by barring unfair methods of competition on internet marketplaces. Cell phone manufacturers and others blocking out independent repair shops. Tech and other companies impose restrictions on self and third-party repairs, making repairs more costly and time-consuming, such as by restricting the distribution of parts, diagnostics, and repair tools. In the order, the president encourages the FTC to issue rules against anti-competitive restrictions on using independent repair shops or doing DIY repairs of your own devices or equipment. Right to repair, more firms can repair your products, less of a monopoly on the repair processes for your devices, which means that there can be more competition, lower prices, yada, yada, yada. Banking and consumer finance. I think this is the final one. Okay, we're almost there, chat. Okay, I know we've done a lot of reading, but it's important. Over the past 4 decades, the United States has lost 70% of the banks it once had, with around 10,000 bank closures. Communities of color are disproportionately affected, with 25% of all rural closures in majority-minority census tracts. Many of these closures are the product of mergers and acquisitions. So once again, we're talking about 2 large firms joining or buying, one or the other or whatever. Though subject to federal review, federal agencies have not formally denied a bank merger applications for more than 15 years. Excessive consolidation raises costs for consumers, restricts credit for small businesses, and harms low-income communities. Branch closures can reduce the amount of small business lending by about 10% and leads to higher interest rates. Even when a customer has multiple options, it is hard to switch banks, partly because a consumer cannot easily take their financial transaction history data to a new bank. That increases the cost of the new bank extending your credit. So basically, because you can't take your transaction data to a new bank, it becomes harder to switch providers. So you're sort of stuck with the one you have. In the order, the president encourages the DOJ and the agencies responsible for banking, the Federal Reserve, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Office of the Comptroller. I'm sure it's supposed to say controller, but it's misspelled. To update guidelines on banking mergers to provide more robust scrutiny of mergers. So basically, more examination on the merging of banking. Encourages the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, to issue rules allowing customers to download their banking data and take it with them. Basically, make it easier for consumers to switch banks and pick whichever one suits them best. There we go. Woo! Big executive order. Promoting competition of the American economy. Overall, pretty good. Very cool from Mr. Biden here. Very impressed. So a few things that could end up not being as great as they might come off here is exactly to what extent they ban non-compete agreements, and then more specifically the 2 or 3 things that they said that they have yet to produce a rule set or a set of plans for. And that I can't really speak about until that further information comes out. But from this cursory glance we got on it, it's looking really good. It's good economic policy that will probably benefit the American economy as a whole, and especially for the largest portion of consumers and civilians as possible. So good job on this one, Biden. And now we've read about it, now we've learned about it, and now we hopefully understand it in a better way. So yeah, good executive order.